Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm happy to be here in front of you, and I'll be discussing basics of interventions in musculoskeletal radiology. It is a pretty vast topic, but by the end of the talk, I presume you will have an overview of whatever we can do uh, to mitigate the pain of the patient. What is the scope of the interventions? What are the most commonly performed interventions? How we do it in the OPD basis, and what are the precautions to be taken. And then towards the end, I am going to show you a few cases of ultrasound-guided interventions, and then I'll take you briefly through pain interventions in spine. So, uh, first and foremost, history and examination. Please kindly take the history yourself, examine the patient yourself. Make your own diagnosis. Do not go by whatever has been written on the performer, because ultimately you are doing the intervention and you are responsible for the patient. Whatever happens to the patient is finally your result and not the clinician's result. Many a times patients come with very confusing features, and you need to point out what the exact diagnosis is. Somebody might come with a lateral epicondylitis kind of pain, whereas it might be a posterior interosseous nerve compression. So please kindly take the history, which is very organ specific, site specific, and then go through the previous records. If the patient is currently on any anticoagulants, because these are elective procedures, especially intra-articular ones, you might cause some hemarthrosis. Better to stop dual antiplatelets for at least 5 days prior. PRP injections, you need to draw the platelets. So if the patient is on antiplatelet agents, kindly stop them 5 days prior. Go through the labs, rule out any active infection. If there is one, never perform an intra-articular procedure. Go through the list of medications that the patient is on. If a patient is hyperglycemic, do let them know. Do let them know that steroids can cause a further hyperglycemia. They need to watch out for the sugars. See if the patient is a liver failure patient or a renal failure patient or a cardiac failure patient, as the excretion of the drugs is going to be affected in that. If the patient is on any CYP3A inhibitors, the steroid is a substrate for it, please see into that. The next point is confirming the diagnosis, as I said, and then planning the route and modality. So I would say anything that is well seen on ultrasound should be done under ultrasound guidance, because it is cheap, it is readily available, it is non-ionizing, and it is a real-time investigation. Prepare the patient, both physically and mentally. Let them know what you are going to do, what is the rationale behind it. Give them a perspective into how they can be benefited, because ultimately all these are rehabilitative procedures and they are not therapeutic. So, for example, in case of a PRP, let them know that they're going to be really tender and sore for the next 1 week. And then the PRP is going to act over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then the final result is going to come by 6 months. This preparation time is also, time to build a reputation with the patient. The patient knows you and then has enough confidence in what you're doing. Procedure standard precautions have to be followed. It has to be a very sterile environment. Kindly use probe covers for all intra-articular injections. Clean, I'm very finicky about cleanliness, so clean, 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 twice or thrice, especially areas like a plantar fasciitis. The foot is a very contaminated area and many times can lead to infection. The post-procedure care can be done giving out a handout to the patient, which is going to explain to the patient as to exactly what we have done and what they have to follow post-procedure, as in rest for the next 48 hours, a lot of icing, NSIDs, and then go for rehab. No intervention is good without a proper rehab. And then follow-up care. So most of the MSK interventions for pain are basically done on superficial structures, and hypodermic needles are good enough. A thicker gauge needle for barbotage and ganglion cyst aspiration, but we need to make sure that the length should never be short because you might reach the target and then be upset about not reaching it. So the probes which we use is high frequency linear probes. The larger footprint up to 16 megahertz. The smaller footprint is good enough for the smaller structures. So biopsy needles and guns, there are various types available. Automated, semi-automated, bone biopsy guns are different gauge and different lengths. What are we injecting? So first and foremost, we are giving a local analgesia to the patient to give an immediate pain relief, in which we are using lignocaine. So lignocaine, basically the time of action is 45 to 90 seconds, and then the action remains till about 90 seconds. So after, 20 minutes. Bupivacaine, the duration of action is longer, up to 8 hours. That is, after 8 hours of the intervention, the patient is going to be relatively comfortable. However, it starts acting only by about 8 to 17 minutes. Commonly used steroids are methylprednisolone and triamcinolone, aceronide. So I'll be coming a little more detail about these steroids. So these are basically particulate steroids, and why are we using particulate steroids is that they are slightly longer acting compared to non-particulate steroid, which is dexamethasone. Dexamethasone, being a non-particulate steroid, is preferred in perineural injections for risk of inadvertent intraarterial injection into the radicular arteries which are very close by. So the disadvantage is that it is relatively shorter acting, but it is a safe drug to give in the spine. Out of dipomedron and Kenalog, Kenalog is preferred for larger joints, and it is slightly longer acting, whereas it has a higher risk of causing skin changes, so it is slightly less preferred for superficial locations. This is the diameter of an erythrocyte, which is 7.5 microns, and the size of dexamethasone is smaller than that. So what I mean to say is that even if it is inadvertently intraarterially injected, it's not going to cause a grave risk to the patient. Other injectates are rehabilitative medicine, hyaluronic acid. It is anabolic, it is analgesic, it is anti-inflammatory, it is chondroprotective, commonly used for knee osteoarthritis. Then platelet-rich plasma and autologous conditioned serum. These are commonly used for tendon and ligament injuries. So basically we perform a dry needling, and after that we inject this. And this basically has about 30 growth factors and helps healing. So prolotherapy also, we are doing a similar thing, wherein we are injecting a hyperosmolar glucose. Hyperosmolar glucose is an irritant, and first of all, you'll do a lot of dry needling, at least 10 passes into the injured area, and then you're going to inject this. Adipose extract or MFAT is the latest in these lines, and good results have been obtained, slightly difficult to obtain otherwise. Side effects of bupivacaine, I would want to discuss about a theoretical risk of chondrotoxicity. So intraarticular injections we give only 0.25%. Liposomal bupivacaine is an alternative. Side effects of steroid, we use a very low dose. So mostly it's not going to be systemic, but we still need to be aware of it. So ultrasound guided procedures, intraarticular diagnostic, as in crystal-induced arthropathy for uric acid and CPPD disease. Septic arthritis, please do not use a local anesthetic because that might interfere with the aspirate examination. therapeutic pain relief, steroid injection, and regenerative therapy, as I already told you. Extra-articular, I want to say about nerve blocks and hydrodissections, as well as barbotage for a calcific tendinosis. Fluoroscopy, CT-guided procedures for the bones and joints. So important thing is that you have to be comfortable, the patient has to be comfortable. So sit in a position with the screen, patient, and the target area in the same line. Do not bend or slouch or make yourself uncomfortable. What do you do in case you don't see the needle? So do not advance it further. Do a visual inspection if you are in the proper plane. Do not move the two things together. And then this is a small video which I want to show you. This is the in-plane approach in which I'm coming from one side. And this is probe translation. It's bringing in the movement of the, you can see the needle coming in from the side. This motion is rotation. This is tilting. This is fanning. Change the bevel. Use color Doppler. And this is a short video showing introduction of the needle in perpendicular axis, which is the short axis plane. So gel stand can be used for superficial structures. Quickly, I want to show you a video of few commonly performed procedures in under ultrasound guidance. This is a subacromial injection, which can be done in an axial, medial, or lateral approach. So the needle is coming in from this side. The lateral approach is usually preferred. And here you can see the distension of the bursa. This can be combined with a posterior glenohumeral joint injection. So the next slide is going to show you the position of the patient, the affected arm up, and we are coming in from the side. This is the humeral head, this is the glenoid, this is the labrum. And that's the needle coming in from the side and distending the capsule. Anterior approach, the benefit is that multiple injections can be done with the single needle insertion. You can distend the subacromial bursa and then go further, inject around the biceps sheath as well as the anterior rotator cuff interval. This is an intra-articular knee injection. The injection is done with some 30 degrees of flexion. Kindly use a bolster or a towel or anything that makes you and the patient comfortable, and it's done in a superolateral approach. Barbotage, I want to tell you because it's a very gratifying procedure, gives a good pain relief to the patient. This is a dense calcific deposit. And a local anesthetic is first injected to numb the area because it's going to be extremely tender. And then in one pass, you insert the needle into it, create a vacuum, a syringe containing normal saline. And with back and forth movement with the vacuum, this is the calcium that we have been able to aspirate. This is a trigger finger injection. So this patient had locking of his finger, and this is post-release. So we have injected a steroid, and then with a cutting edge needle with a bevel facing up with back and forth movements, I've tried to release the pulley. So as I told you, dry needling combined with ACS gives very good results. Either it can be a surface steroid injection or an ACS. Here, this is the extensor carpi radialis brevis tendon with some calcification, a dry needling, and surface steroid injection has been performed for him. This is an injection, again in the elbow, the anterior band of the ulnar collateral ligament has been dry needle, and then ACS is injected to promote healing. Dequervin stenosynovitis, a very common condition. Trochanteric bursitis, plantar fascia, I want to say a little about. There is a controversial role of steroids in this. So either you can use this approach, but I feel it's slightly, the sole is a slightly tough area, so a medial approach combined with the Baxter's nerve block can be used. and dry needling is preferred over a steroid injection for risk of rupture. So the previous speaker, although I could not understand in detail, but I guess has discussed about the pain in spine and what is the region of generation. So whenever a patient comes for a spine injection, please delineate whether the pain is coming from a particular nerve root or it is because of these zygoapophyseal joints. Then only go and inject. So usually in a younger patient, you can, delineate a particular dermatome which is involved, and you can point out a particular spinal level which needs to be injected. However, it is a little complicated in elderly patients where there might be multi-level involvement, and then a caudal blocker or epidural spinal anesthesia can be considered. So in case you can find out a single nerve root which is irritated and is causing pain, so you need to see clinically plus the imaging. In imaging, if it is a central disc protrusion, it is basically causing compression to the traversing nerve root, and the injection has to be given a level below from which level the nerve is going to exit. As opposed to a lateral disc herniation in which the nerve is getting compressed at the same level. So that has to be taken into consideration. Then fluoroscopy versus CT, I would say it's a personal choice and individual protocol. There are pros and cons. There are case reports of grievous problems in both the modalities. However, we prefer CT because you can directly visualize the needle. Besides, we are used to doing it in this manner. And logistically, a CT is more available modality for a radiologist than fluoroscopy, in which you have to deal with multiple others to give you the machine. So the benefit of CT, as I told you, is very objective. You can actually give the exact positioning of the needle, which you might not be able to see on fluoroscopy. For cervical nerve root blocks, please be extremely careful. Radicular arteries, vertebral artery, everything has to be protected. Please position the tip of the needle in a extraforaminal and inferior rather than an intraforaminal position. So this is a case of a bad facet joint disease, and here we've performed a bilateral facet block. While performing a facet block, during a CT we need to make sure about the curvature of the joint, and then the needle has to be placed accordingly. This is a selective S1 nerve root block. This patient had a very bad disease compressing the S1 nerve root, and and here we can see the needle positioned exactly where we want it to be, next to the nerve. And this is a selective C7 nerve root block. I want to emphasize, please give iohexol to delineate the nerve sheath before injecting. Please always aspirate and see before injecting. So fluoroscopy steps in fluoroscopic guided nerve root block. So there have been some descriptions of where exactly your needle has to be. There is a description of superior level or inferior level block. So we do not commonly perform it in our institutes, but sometimes we do some cases. So here is one case wherein we've done a selective nerve root block. So I'll just try to show you what we do. We try to obtain a Scotty dog position, and we need to target the neck of the Scotty dog, and first put a marker, subsequently try to position the needles, and then confirm the position in both AP and lateral views. Give the dye, make sure that it's going inside the nerve sheath and not inside the artery, and then perform the block. So take home messages: please do not perform any intervention if you are unsure. Please very still when you are doing it. Please never a motor nerve or inject.